Right, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and welcome, of course, to those watching and joining online as well. Very good to see so many people here. I'm sure it's land reform and not tea, cake and cool air that is drawing you in, but enjoy all of that. Very good to have you here. I'm Hamish Trench, Chief Executive at the Scottish Land Commission, and I'm going to be chairing us through this afternoon's short discussion on quite a big question. And the big question we're asking is, what would it look like to complete Scotland's land reform journey? Relatively simple question, but a big one. Many of us, of course, will be probably deep in the detail of the current land reform bill going through the Scottish Parliament, not least the large number of amendments that the committee are working their way through at the moment. Today is not specifically about the current bill. Today is about looking beyond that. And today really is the first part of a conversation that we at the Scottish Land Commission are looking to take forward over the course of this year, which really opens up the question of where are we going with land reform? Do we have a shared sense of the end point? And can we build a shared sense of the outcome that we're looking to achieve from this? Scotland, of course, has you've seen land reform continue to be on the political agenda with the Scottish Parliament for 25 years now, since devolution, consistently on the agenda. And over that time, I think it's fair to say there has been real change, real progress in how land is owned, in how land is managed, and actually in how land is understood. Real change both in legal terms, of course, with 2 Land Reform Acts and another current bill going through Parliament, and I think real change in cultural terms as well, in terms of shifts in what's expected, what's practiced in terms of responsible land ownership, and indeed expectations that people have about being able to engage with questions about Scotland's land, where it's going, what it means for people. Now, land reform is often described as a journey, and I often use that phrase myself. If it is a journey, even if it is a long one, and it may be, it's helpful, I think, to check in on, do we have a shared sense of the destination? And that's what today's discussion is about, and that's what the work that we're hoping to develop over the summer months and into the rest of this year is about in the ScotLand Futures initiative. It's a question we're often asked, actually. What's the end point? What's the desired outcome from land reform? Whether that's by landowners, land managers, communities, looking to get a sense of certainty, a sense of direction in where we're going with this. And I think that's a fair question to ask. Our chair at the Land Commission, Mike Russell, is fond of reminding me that the Irish Land Commission started in the 1880s, admittedly in very different circumstances, and was formally disbanded in 1999. Again, it brings a focus to what is the end point. Hopefully in fewer than 100 years, we might be able to clarify our end point and the destination that we're seeking to get to here. So that's the question. Can we develop that? Can we develop that actually with a degree of consensus, with a degree of shared vision of where we're trying to get to? And I hope today will be a starting point of that in stimulating some discussion, and hopefully stimulating all of you actually to help us think about this over the months ahead. Now, I'm pleased we have got a very varied panel joining us today to help us think this through from different perspectives. I'm just going to briefly introduce our panel members before we turn to them. Very pleased to have with us today, we have Donna Smith, Chief Executive of the Scottish Crofting Federation, who brings wide experience in crofting and land use policy. We have Andrew Brough, Estates Director at Strathmore Estates, bringing a wide experience of land and estate management, particularly in the south and east of Scotland. We have Col Gordon, farming at his family farm north of Inverness. Col also, I think, closely involved in the Land Workers Alliance and the Invergordon Development Trust. We have Professor Jill Robbie, Professor of Property Law and Natural Environment at the University of Glasgow and Deputy Chair of NatureScot. And James McKessick-Leach, Policy and Practice Lead at the Scottish Land Commission, leading work on land governance, ownership and the rural land market. So we've deliberately brought together, I hope, a range of different perspectives to explore this question from different angles today. In a moment, I'm going to ask each panellist just to begin by setting out their own thoughts on this core question: what would it look like to you to complete Scotland's land reform journey? We'll then develop the discussion with the panel a wee bit, and then, of course, open up to questions from the floor. So do, as we're going through this, please think through questions or comments or issues that you would like to raise as the discussion goes on. But for now, let's turn to the panel. What would it look like to you to complete Scotland's land reform journey? And Donna, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today, and I make no apology for being biased before I start this, but I'm going to talk quite a bit about crofting when we consider what we might want to be achieved through land reform. So as of now, I'm sure many of you know, Scotland has one of the most concentrated land ownership patterns in the world, and in very broad terms, the successful land reform would result in this no longer being the case. In 1886, we saw a significant step in land reform terms in this country with the introduction of the Crofters Holding Scotland Act. You may say it was the original land reform. It saw crofters being given the right to secure inheritable tenancy and a right to fair rents, amongst other things, in return for them having certain responsibilities, such as living on or near the land and cultivating or maintaining it. The establishment of this act gave crofters a fair and secure way to occupy their own bit of land and have access to communal grazing land for shared use. As we look to the future, there are many positive lessons and ideas that we can take from this to funnel into land reform that could achieve great outcomes. Crofting has long shown that you do not need large parcels of privately owned land to achieve positive outcomes for community, climate and nature. And further, it shows that you can reconcile high quality food production with nature restoration and climate mitigation, and there are examples of this all over the crofting counties. Crofting as a system holds enormous potential for diversification of land access and tenure, and can help to break up the concentration of large landowners' wealth and power. Crofting strengthens local communities and local decision making, and it is no coincidence that most community-owned estates are located in the crofting counties. Is the current system perfect? Absolutely not, but the principles, if applied in a revised modern context, could deliver for land reform, and that's why we think it's key when we look to the future. It would be remiss of me, therefore, not to suggest that large-scale creation of new crofts should feature in our land reform future, because the model already exists and the principles of it can deliver communities where people work collaboratively and in equal partnership with those involved, more people having an affordable, secure, inheritable tenancy for their family home and a small piece of land they can work themselves, and more people holding natural or semi-natural habitats as common land, which are shared collectively and subject to collective local decision-making. These principles could work anywhere in Scotland and would significantly reshape the land ownership and occupancy model, making it much more diverse. And very importantly, in terms of the land reform question, creating more crofts will give more access to more land for more people. We do not landowners' wealth and power. Crofting strengthens local communities and local decision making, and it is no coincidence that most community-owned estates are located in the crofting counties. Is the current system perfect? Absolutely not, but the principles, if applied in a revised modern context, could deliver for land reform, and that's why we think it's key when we look to the future. It would be remiss of me, therefore, not to suggest that large-scale creation of new crofts should feature in our land reform future, because the model already exists and the principles of it can deliver communities where people work collaboratively and in equal partnership with those involved, more people having an affordable, secure, inheritable tenancy for their family home and a small piece of land they can work themselves, and more people holding natural or semi-natural habitats as common land, which are shared collectively and subject to collective local decision making. These principles could work anywhere in Scotland and would significantly reshape the land ownership and occupancy model, making it much more diverse. And very importantly, in terms of the land reform question, creating more crofts will give more access to more land for more people. Have agency to take care of their own land. The balance of ownership will have swung away from what we have currently, which is 50% of rural land in this country being owned by 433 people. I'm sure many of you know Andy Whiteman's study on these figures, to something much more diverse with a significant increase in community-owned land. We would have created 10,000 new crofts with secure heritable tenancies to produce food for our communities in a sustainable way, and Scotland's land will be there for all of us, not for the profit of a few. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. Plenty of food for thought in there. Andrew, we'll turn to you.
Okay, thanks, Hamish. I suppose I look at it from a landowner's point of view, and I kind of think, what more do we need from land reform?
We do not landowners' wealth.
Much more. Many of you will look at me and think that as an estate manager, I have unqualified access to land, and therefore it's no surprise that that's my view. But I've worked in Scotland for 20 years now, and for the majority of that time, I've lived nowhere near the land that I manage. Therefore, the lands in the surrounding surrounding the villages that I've lived in, I've had to take advantage of that, of where other people have been the landowner. And I've never had a problem with that. I've never thought that, I want any say in what they do. I've never thought I want to them to tell me what their plans are for the next few years. And we seem to have gone on quite well like that.
Balance of ownership will have swung away from what we have currently, which is 50%.
And I do question
33.
in terms of how many people are interested in land reform. Everyone obviously here is interested in land
More
reform.
diverse with a significant increase in community-owned
The figure
land.
that I look at is
We would have created 10,000 new...
2021 Holyrood election, when Andy Whiteman, the ex-Green MSP, stood on effectively a land reform ticket on the Highlands and Islands list. And he received 3.6% of the vote. That's not a lot.
Okay, thanks, Hamish.
I suppose I look at it from landowners' point of view, and I kind of think, what more do we need from land reform?
We do not landowners' grants.
Much more. Many of you will look at me and think that as an estate manager, I have unqualified access to land, and therefore it's no surprise that that's my view. But I've worked in Scotland for 20 years now, and for the majority of that time, I've lived nowhere near the land that I manage. Therefore, the lands in the surrounding villages that I've lived in, I've had to take advantage of that, of where other people have been the landowner. I do question the value of large. And I've never had a problem with that. I've never thought that I want any say in what they do. I've never thought I want to them to tell me what their plans are for the next few years. And we seem to have gone on quite well like that.
Balance of ownership will have swung away from what we have currently, which is 50%.
Another key element of land. And I do question
33.
in terms of how many people are interested. Everyone obviously here is interested in land.
More diverse with a significant increase in community-owned
land. The figure that I look at is
we would have created 10,000 new...
2021 new entrants to new lifeblood of the Holyrood election, when Andy what they deserve. And there was obviously, I suppose I look at it, the land reform for the majority of that time, I've lived nowhere near the land that I manage. Therefore, the lands in the surrounding villages that I've lived in. Some people, there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding that we can have a tenanted sector without landlords. That just is not. That is just not possible. So finally, I think I'd just finish on my own. I think it would be good to have equilibrium of land ownership, or get a balance where everyone that wants land has access to land, be that large-scale farmers, or be that the small, a person who wants 1 or 2 acres just to raise their sheep and their chickens. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Food for thought on finishing there with everyone that wants land can have access to it. Cole, moving on to you.
Thanks very much. If we're serious about completing land reform in Scotland, I think we need to ask a deeper question. What does it mean to belong to land, not just to own it? In Gaelic, a speaker might say, I belong to such and such a place. I belong to Skye. And that's not I'm from, but I belong. In Gaelic, this would be bunyami, literally I belong to. And that word, buntinas, belonging, carries the weight of relationship, even blood relative, blood relation. It speaks to an older way of being, one rooted in entanglement with place, not separation from or domination over it. So I want to propose one bold step we could take towards this reorientation. One legal innovation that could help complete this journey. This way of thinking is ancient, but it's not abstract. Take the word tua. It means both a territory and the people of that territory. There was no division, distinction. The people were the place was its people, and to harm one was to harm the other. And this understanding endured for centuries. Even during the crofting wars of the 1880s, people in the Gaeltacht didn't call themselves crofters. They would call themselves either Gaels or the Tua. And their rallying cry is Tresa Tua na Tierna, means the people are mightier than a lord. But it also carries implicitly in that the territory was also mightier than the Lord. Because what had changed, what had caused so much outrage, was that the chiefs had become landlords, and they'd moved from being leaders with relationship to their people and their land to owners of that land and above the people. This shift was seen not just as a betrayal, but as cosmic disorder. It violated a very old belief, first written down in the 7th century, called Verflademan, or the justice of the ruler. It was said that a leader was in a sacred marriage to the land. Literally, the people, through their leader, were married to the land, to the territory. And if land suffered through famine or floods, it was a sign of the relationship, the marriage having broken down. And the leader had failed in their duties to the people in the place. So from this sacred ecology comes the idea of duchas, the right and therefore the responsibility to care for the place you belong to. So here's the thing. In Gaelic, the concept of ownership doesn't exist in Gaelic thought. It's not a thing. There isn't a clean, direct way to express ownership in the language. So this idea that land can be owned outright, turned into property, was and still is not only foreign, it's in direct contradiction to how Gaels understood and still understand themselves in the world. And yet, for at least the past 400 years, these relational ways of being have been systematically dismantled, often through legal instruments and policies that were explicitly described as colonial. Today, those living in the Gaeltacht are not just increasingly disconnected from these traditions, they're surviving in the ruins of what was taken. And I believe that if we're serious about confronting the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the crisis of ever-growing social inequity, the crisis of the lack of meaning and belonging, we need to find ways to revive, reroute, and reimagine these suppressed modes of relation. Across the world, indigenous peoples, although facing immense pressure, continue to be the ones who steward 80% of global biodiversity. And this is not a coincidence. It's because of these types of relational worldviews that time and time again are found present in every region of the globe. And in the last decade, we've seen something remarkable happen. A new legal tool has emerged from within these worldviews, environmental personhood. Rivers in New Zealand and in India, forests in Canada, even in Spain, we're now seeing elements of the natural world are now being granted legal personhood. They're no longer owned by anyone. They're recognized as beings with their own rights. People don't possess them, they steward them. These aren't just interesting legal tools, they're acts of repair, remembering, and resistance. This to me could be a game changer in Scotland. Not just because it could break up the concentration of land ownership, although I think there's possibility there, but more profoundly as a way to embed Gaelic ways of being into our legal system, to move beyond ownership and into guardianship, to create space for the re-emergence of suppressed relational knowledge, and to root land reform not only in fairness but in repair. So if the question is, what would a complete land reform look like? It would look like right relationship being restored. A legal system not built on dominion but on belonging, not a return to a long gone past but a return to relation. The language is already here, and the task now is to work out how to live by it.
Thank you, Cole. And Jill, on to you.
Thank you. In a fully land reformed Scotland, the population of Scotland is not concentrated around the Central Belt alone. Rural Scotland is an attractive and vibrant place where the trend of rural depopulation has been reversed. Land ownership has been diversified, and there are a number of different ways in which land is owned and used, which are tailored to the places and environments and populations where they exist. Individual ownership still exists, but the concentration at which it existed in the past has been forgotten. Community forms of ownership and management are far more common, and examples of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust are seen as frontrunners in a long history of land reform. Donna's suggestion of 10,000 crofts has also been implemented in this fully land reformed Scotland. The majority of housing in rural places is used and occupied by people who live there. There's a greater number and diversity of housing provision, such as long-term rented accommodation, small houses for young adults buying their first homes, and family homes. If there is a holiday home or a second home, the owner is required to make a contribution to the local community. The diversification of land ownership allows communities to have access to food for local food production, which is healthy, seasonal, and regionally specific. Everyone has or knows someone with access to a veg patch, a polycrop, a chicken coop, a field for sheep, cows, goats or pigs. Local slaughterhouses and local shops means that any animals, fruit, veg that's raised or grown locally can be eaten locally. School meals are made with this local food together with a steady stream of venison. The whisky of Scotland is still a significant economic product, and new smaller scale distilleries have popped up around the country. Biodiversity is recovering. There has been a general acceptance that the health of our earth is crucial for our own well-being, and because people have access to land, they're more involved in food cultivation and live in more rural places, the connection between ecosystem health is ever more obvious to the populations living in Scotland. Communities which host reintroduced species like beavers and sea eagles are fairly rewarded for their part in supporting biodiversity, which means there's more positive support for reintroduction projects. Food producers are well supported with experimenting with new techniques and reinvigorating old techniques for managing how to live with wildlife. There's significant diversity and resilience in the food system that means that single shocks like droughts or pests can be adequately handled by the system, and no one goes hungry or unnecessarily goes out of business. Community-owned energy is the norm, which means that clean and cheap energy in the regions where it's generated is plentiful, and the profits which this energy makes supports community projects such as local electric buses and local water and sewerage infrastructure. Sorry guys, I can't solve the ferries through land reform. The climate has already become more chaotic. This was something that was on the way before the land reform process started. But communities have had the space and ability to be able to deploy nature-based solutions like remeandering of the rivers and peatland restoration, which means there's more resilience to the chaos. There is support again for innovation in this area, which means we've been able to learn new methods of coping with a changing climate. It was hard work getting here, and the process is not and never will be completed. New challenges emerge, but there are no longer single points of failure. That means that communities are brave enough to try new solutions to new problems. Scotland fulfills its vision of a strong and dynamic relationship between its land and its people, where all land contributes to a modern, sustainable and successful country.
Thanks, Jill, for a broad vision of the future there. James, do you?
Thanks. So I'm going to start with a wee story, but I think my theme is really about opportunity. Just over 100 years ago, my great-grandfather, like so many, came back from the fields of France into a very different world. And in that world of change in the 1920s, he was able, along with his father, to buy the farm that I grew up on. The acquisition of that farm meant that there was a stable base for our family for a business. It meant that my grandfather had an asset to borrow against to start a new business. My own parents did the same a generation later. But without that asset, that opportunity probably wouldn't have been there. And that goes for the same of so many people who acquired farms in that early part of the 20th century through to the mid part of the 20th century. But unfortunately, those opportunities have fizzled out in past decades. But of course, those reforms, that opportunity didn't come about through land reform legislation. It came about partly through changes to tax legislation in terms of death duties. But actually, in our case, it wasn't death duties that gave the opportunity to my great-grandfather. It was a discussion with the landowner at the time, along with many others, who were able to have a sensible conversation, come to an agreement, and the land changed hands without any fuss or acrimony or any of the other issues that might otherwise have arisen. And it's that kind of common place to come back to, where the land market moves, where the opportunities are there, that doesn't necessarily require legislation, but it's part of a cultural shift of times. And I think perhaps we're entering that kind of phase. We've heard, I think from others, we know that land use is changing, either because we take action to mitigate the effects of climate change and biodiversity loss, or we fail to do so and it changes as a result anyway. So we know that change is coming. We also know that some of the systems that we have in place at the moment are not fit for purpose. And therefore there needs to be a broader scope in how we meet those challenges. Of course, these are challenges that don't just apply to Scotland. Every country wrestles with issues of land management, land use, and indeed ownership. And part of the work of the Commission is to very much look abroad. One of the things that we see there is not just, in particular, the influence of local municipal government in a sense that we don't have here, but also the way that land ownership is also much more mixed, that governance models are more mixed in terms of, rather than having private ownership or public ownership or community ownership, and never the three shall meet, actually you get that mixture of part private, part public, part community, part local investors, part local farmers, everyone mixed in, involved in the decision-making processes, deciding on what's going to happen next, the direction of travel of land use, whether they're going to be planting trees or testing some new crops or whatever it might be. It's that opportunity, that working together, that collaboration that I think holds the answer to the future of land reform in Scotland. And linked to that, there are other levers to pull as well. There has been, I think, kind of quite a lot of discussion recently around the way that land is taxed, not least because of changes to inheritance tax that are coming down the road in the next year or so. There is no doubt that land is a store of wealth within the country, and certainly our land market reporting has shown that there are people who are buying Scottish land because in a turbulent global economy it has a gold-like quality. It is a safe haven asset in a established democracy, yet that is a lot of wealth that is not being put to productive use necessarily elsewhere. We also know that how property is engaged in the rest of the tax system, whether that be through capital gains or indeed non-domestic rates and council tax, is a bit dysfunctional, and no one particularly would support the continuation of those systems. But it's finding the system to replace them, to tie it all together, so that when government tweaks its policy or sets its ambitions, not just the subsidy system is there to support them, but the tax system is as well. That system works fairly, it works for the economy, it works for our needs and ambitions. And all that should be geared towards opening up those opportunities. So I think that's it. There's no one magic lever, there's no one bill, there's no one act of parliament, there's no one tax policy or planning policy or anything that will do it. It's a mixture of all those things. It's a mixture of all those different interests, whether they be private, public, community, small business, big business, investors, whoever it is, working together, collaborating through governance structures that possibly don't even exist yet. But ultimately, it's about that opportunity, and I hope from this discussion today, and indeed for the rest of the Scotland Futures campaign that we're running, we really get to hear about those opportunities and really start to chart a way forward, a new way forward, because we know change is coming, and it's up to us to make sure that change is, works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, James, and thank you all our panellists. So we've heard, I think, some quite different perspectives there, some different angles, some different ways of coming at this. But I'm struck there is a theme certainly amongst what a number of you are saying that I think connects this around actually the availability of land, being able to access land. Andrew, I think you put it quite simply actually when you said if somebody wants to be able to use land, they can. They can access it. So there is a theme there that I think would be really interesting to explore, because as a commission, wherever we go in Scotland, whether it's north or south, one of the things we're often asked is, should it not be more normal? Should it not be easier for people to be able to use land? Whether that's to farm, to grow, to build, to live, frankly any number of productive business purposes, developing local businesses. And I think that seems to be at the core of the land reform challenge we have, of actually opening up opportunities for people to own, use, lease land in all sorts of different ways. So I'd like to explore more with the panel what would really open up opportunities for the availability of land. What would make it normal for somebody wanting to be able to use land, to be able to do that? Donna, I might come to you first. I mean, crofting is a proven model of small-scale land ownership, creating opportunities. What lessons could we take from that? Be great to keep developing crofting as we absolutely should, but perhaps what lessons can we take from that more widely for Scotland in terms of access to land, availability of land?
Yeah, so I think, that was ultra loud. So I think, it kind of chimes maybe with some of what Col was talking about and Jill was talking about. I think somewhere along the line we've lost sight of the value of land. And by the value of land, I don't mean the economic value of land. That's kind of the problem. So like if you talk to many crofters, they will talk about seeing the access that they have to the land as a privilege. And I think that's maybe something that we need to strike back to. So I'm looking at the row of grass ceiling ladies over there, who many of you don't know about, but we had a get-together a couple of weeks ago, and they were all talking about their journey. Many of them are crofters. And the number of them that touched on the fact that they really valued the opportunity that they had been given to have access to the land. And it's almost like we need to get back to some of that, and perhaps if we saw the land as less of a commodity that's just sold to the highest bidder, but land instead is going to people who have a plan, a kind of a mission that they want to achieve for its future and have a commitment to being present there, to being active there, and whatever. So it's kind of, I think we've got to change that conversation, because the money thing is killing it. And not everybody has money, but lots of people would really value the opportunity to do something active with a piece of land. So I think that's where, crofting traditionally sort of had that at its core, in that you had access to land for a very small rent, and that's still the case. Some of the rents nowadays are still extremely small, but somewhere along the line, the market has come in and skewed some of the access points to that. So whilst you might still be paying a very low rent to your landlord, you have to pay a lot of money to get in, and that defeats the purpose of what crofting was about. So I think if we could roll back to that idea of actually having access to that land for a small piece of rent, but because you value it and you're going to cherish it and you're going to steward it and whatever, I think that might swing some of the balance the other way.
Okay. Andrew, you've seen this particularly from a kind of south of Scotland and east of Scotland perspective. What to you would actually unlock opportunities for people to be able to, as you say, access the land that they're looking for?
I think on a large scale letting, for example, for farming, I think there's a real struggle. I think tenant farming could be in terminal decline, and I think that's really sad. I came into this industry from a non-farming background, and I really enjoy the tenant farming side, but I think it's teetering on the brink. And part of that is because maybe it hasn't been managed as it should in the past. We've got lots of, farming has moved faster. It should have. We need investment. The investment hasn't been there. The return in rent hasn't provided the funding for landlords to invest. And I think, and the issues now, especially that I see now in arable areas, which I'm up in Angus, is the amount that we can earn by farming it ourselves as opposed to renting it out is massive. We are we make far more money by just adding it onto our existing farming enterprise than offering it out to tenants, which I personally think is quite sad. I think on a small scale, then I think it's about confidence to let, and this is maybe one for Jill, but the legal side of it is just a nightmare. Someone wants to rent 4 square meters, and suddenly, I've got to drag through files to see if I can find an agreement from 6 years ago, and then I've got to decide whether that's still right, and it's just a lot of effort, and consequently, it probably just drops down my email list, and I go on to move on to something else. Give an example of that I had at Buccleuch about 15 or so years ago. We had someone had rented about 6 square meters and created a hut. It was quite a cute little hut, actually, a little green hut just off the main road. And they paid, I don't know, about £5 a year for it. Done it since the 70s. And about 2005, the lady's husband died, and she's like, "Oh, my husband died. I'd quite like to give up the hut." And I was like, "That's fair enough, it didn't really bother us." But I said, "Okay." I said, "Are you gonna come and take it down?" She said, "Oh, no." She goes, "I'm 85. My children live down south." She goes, "I can't do that." So I worked out the other day that we must have got like 500 quid over 30 years for it, and then it cost me probably about 600 quid to remove it. That's just not sensible. I'm just not going to go into deals like that. It just doesn't make economic sense to us. And then I think just looking at the some of the things that's got the Land Commission, it's very much about living on the land as well. And this is one thing I think that one of the part of the land right and responsibility statement is that they want more people to own and lease land. But people who want to own land, people who want land, they want to live on that land as well. And I've got a friend in Perthshire. She's bought 17 acres. She's got a bit of a horse enterprise on it, things like that. She's put planning permission in, and she's been refused because it breaches planning policy. Now, I think the majority of people who want to own land in Scotland want to live on that land. They want to walk out their back door and into their land, or walk down the road to their land. People just don't want to own land in itself. So I think the planning authorities have to align with the land right and responsibility statement, and I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, so you're raising some questions there around alignment, joining up. Are we actually kind of coordinating things here? You flagged also, I think, the complexity of legislation. Jill, you'll be familiar with that sort of view of life. So is the answer to land availability legal, or is it cultural?
I'm sorry that I'm representing the law here. Please don't shoot the lawyer. Should I? Was this the only one? So if I'm thinking about access to land can mean so many different things, because I, as someone who doesn't own property, have access to most of the private land in Scotland, in the sense of the right to roam, which is incredible, right? That's just in an international context, it's really quite unusual. But if you want to live somewhere, if you want to farm somewhere, if you want to invest in any infrastructure, have some sort of security that your home, you're not going to be evicted, that investment is going to be long lasting, that's when the law starts to have to bite or provide that security. And the balance between flexibility of an owner and security for the person who doesn't own but wants to use the land, I think has been the thing that's been going back and forth in law since the beginning of time, which I think is why crofting is just endlessly complicated, and why agricultural tenancies are endlessly complicated, because it's trying to find that balance, and each tiny little additional amendment is making everything endlessly worse, in a sense. I don't have the answer necessarily to that, but I think it's new governance regimes would be wonderful, in the sense that we could find that balance between security and access, so that when an owner changes, for example, it's not just the whim of the owner that you're relying on, and then all of your home or investment is kind of wiped clean. So I think law definitely has a role for providing the scaffolding to allow that access to take place, in that kind of balance between flexibility and security.
Okay. James and Cole, I know, both of you have looked at this question, I think, in a farming context particularly. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I think, first of all, just the image of crofting and ag holdings legislation being complicated just give me like the kind of the buckaroo image of just adding a little bit more until it was like that. And it possibly does feel like that at times. I think there's definitely, I think one of the themes that was also coming through is that kind of sense of absenteeism as well, in that people do want to live on the land, they want to be engaged in the communities. Of course, the biggest absentee landowner in the country are Scottish ministers, and I think there is a role for public sector leadership in this. And actually, a lot of the challenges that face the private sector face the public sector, and actually, if we are serious about rural Scotland developing housing, about providing opportunities, infrastructure, a repeopling agenda, there is a role for the public sector to step up and lead in that and show the good practice. And I think it's all very well and good, having the land rights responsibility statement, doing the great practice work that we do. But unless the public sector takes that leadership role, we're always going to be chasing our tail a wee bit, I think. So that's really the big opportunity in my mind in the next step, and part of that ties into probably local governance reform, as I mentioned, kind of at the beginning, local municipalities in a European sense play such a huge role in land use and management decisions, yet we don't have an equivalent here. So again, it's also just about thinking about the role of the public sector in not just doing policy and whatever it might be, but being a leader as a big landowner, demonstrating the innovation that can happen when you've got someone who is really willing to work with communities, work with people who are looking for access, to find those new governance models. So I think that's the big challenge probably for us and for the wider public sector.
Yeah, I think really helpful to flag the leadership role for public sector there. And of course, I think it's one of the strengths of Scotland's approach to land reform, actually, is that it is blind to the sector. Scotland's approach to land reform is about everyone who owns land, whether you are private, public, community, NGO sector. And that is, I think, a strength we can build on. Cole?
I think if we're talking about farming land, I would say, particularly for medium and small farms, what we're coming up to is a crisis of succession, where the historic norms of what would happen when you pass a farm on through the generations, it's not necessarily fit for purpose that the oldest son would get everything anymore. I mean, I think a lot of people who are in the situation now, we're getting an average age of active farmers, I think, is around the 60 mark. So this is coming up. This is coming up, that there's going to have to be this transfer of ownership, and I think this is a big opportunity for building new ways of expanding that ownership or expanding that access, because not necessarily all the children want to take on this. So if we're going to avoid it all just going on the open market, potentially this is a big opportunity for community ownership or different models that are we haven't necessarily even thought about. But I think there's a real issue here, if we're going to make that happen, is to create models of what that might look like, invest in that, so we can build capacity for trust between people who might want access to that land and the people who are giving away the land or selling it or whatever that's going to be. But I think there's a real opportunity coming up very soon as we go into this sort of big tipping point of succession.
Okay, thanks. And just before we open it up, one of the things that we're hoping to do through the ScotLand Futures Initiative is to test really the degree of consensus that there is around some of the big picture outcomes here. But I think we're very aware that achieving full consensus on a programme of land reform is probably very unlikely. But actually, the question is there value in having greater certainty, greater clarity in the sense of direction? And I'd be interested just in brief thoughts on the panel on, even if there isn't full consensus, and even within the panel, of course, there's widely different views and visions of what the land reform direction is. But if we can achieve a degree of consensus about the end point here, do you see some value in creating a bit more of a stable environment to operate in, whether you might be a crofter, a landowner, a tenant, a community member, different perspectives? Who wants to pick that one up first, before I pick on Jill?
So I think that for, at least in the rooms that I've been in, people have been saying we need a national conversation about Scotland's land for quite a while. So when Scotland's Futures, the discussion was announced, I thought that's exactly what we really need. From my perspective, I see big pressures in terms of food, biodiversity, energy, housing, that really need a coordinated response, and there are good places where we should do these things, and we almost need to make sure that our best productive farming land is not used for something that is not best productive farming, in a sense, because we've only got a very small percentage of Scotland that can be used for that. So to me, it's all about generating resilience in the system, and for all of these individual topics to be seen together to make Scotland this kind of resilient and livable place, particularly for our rural populations.
Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, I love the idea of trying to reach consensus, but I think look, it's not an easy task, but I think the thing that's often missing is so obviously, I mean, today I've talked a lot about crofting, and we've all talked a lot probably about rural land, but like urban land as well is really important, and I think it's hard maybe to engage people in an urban situation about the land. They probably don't think the land reform question applies to them. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there. How do we do that? Because how do we bring that in? Because actually, if you start to bring that in, then there's probably more scope to really explore what's achievable in an urban context. And it is happening in some places. I mean, there's some cities and stuff where there's some amazing sort of communal projects happening and stuff like that. And so there's little models out there of showing what can be achieved. We need to broaden that out. And I think it is valuable to keep on talking. I think if we can find the commonalities, that's great. It's not an easy thing. And I think it requires some brave decisions from our government and our politicians. But there are examples in other countries, and that's been touched on, about what is achievable if governments commit and make those bold decisions. So we could drastically reshape it, but we do have to keep talking about it. But I think if we get people engaged, then generally there is a lot of interest in it. So this conversation is great, and I hope it does engage that wider sector outside of rural, because we need them to make this work. That's where most of the population is in the cities rather than the rural side. So yeah, I think we need to help everybody understand what land reform could deliver for them in their world.
Absolutely, I think hugely important point to remember the urban context, and I think today inevitably we're talking largely in the rural context, given where we are in the venue and the context. But there's no question that we see demand for reforms in an urban context in all the same issues relating to housing, access to land, development, productive use. Good. We've heard quite a wide range of ideas and mix. Let's open it up to questions, comments, ideas from the floor. I know many of you here are deeply involved in some of these questions around land reform, land use, land ownership. So really, please feel free to raise any questions directly to the panel on things you've heard, or wider points that you'd like to put into the discussion. Yes.
I suppose my question is...
Oh, hang on, sorry, I'm just going to say, if you could just hang on, and there's a mic that's coming, and then we can make sure we hear everyone. Yeah.
Yes,
great.
I suppose this one's for Donna, primarily because it's about crofting and it's about brave decisions. Donna talked about perhaps creating 1,000 new crofts, talked about the principles of crofting being applied potentially generally across Scotland. I'm just interested, how easy would it be to extend crofting tenure to the rest of Scotland? I think when the crofting legislation was first put through, there was consideration was given to extending it to Highland Aberdeenshire, to Highland Banffshire. Perhaps since we're not getting a national park in Galloway, we could extend crofting to Galloway. That might be an alternative way of improving land management and creating a better environment there. Just so I'd be interested in Donna's views on that first, and other members of the panel as well, potentially.
Is it this one? Yeah. So how easy would it be? So in theory, fairly easy. Oh, it's gone off, is it? No, it's on. In theory, fairly easy. So under current crofting legislation, it is possible to extend crofting across anywhere in Scotland. It's just that at the moment it's still reserved for the traditional crofting counties. But I guess it's such an alien concept maybe for wider Scotland that there'd be a lot of work to do there. But there is nothing that stops. If Scottish Government chose to expand the crofting counties to everywhere, then the mechanisms are all there. So any owner of land anywhere in Scotland, if that happened, could choose to create new crofts and set that all up. So that the mechanisms already exist. I think getting buy-in would be the harder part. But there's maybe ways that you could start to do that. So if there had been a national park going ahead, for instance, you could have said, well, let's use a national park as a pilot area where you set that up and they create so many crofts as they do it or whatever, and off you go. Scottish ministers could absolutely create some new crofts wherever, and particularly then again if you extended it across. So I would say easy. I'm probably making that simplistic, and you're kind of giggling because it's not that straightforward. But the processes are there if people had the will to give it a go.
Thanks, Donna. And yes, I think really helpful to have crofting as that proven model that we can look at. I'll add briefly to that, having actually been in the south of Scotland myself last week, talking with people who are keen to find a way of offering small land holdings in some form to people locally. There are, of course, other ways of doing it as well. The Land Reform Bill is revamping small land holdings legislation, and there may indeed be other completely different ways of joint ventures and contracts that could enable small areas of land to be made available, learning the lessons from crofting as well. So I think really helpful to explore all options in that. Another question over here, yeah.
I think Jill Robbie has stolen part of my question. I'm very much in favour of a national conversation, but based around the question, we're on a journey. What is the destination of that journey? And it's not just a land reform journey, it's a very holistic question. We have a country here which has got demands and needs. We need housing, food, leisure, recreation, wood, nature restoration, and a whole lot of other things. What is that land going to be used for? How is that constructed? How it's done? And within that, there's a number of things. Ownership there. People desire to own land because it means they have the right to make that decision. To what is the extent and the parameters of that right? And that needs to be satisfied. What is the extent of control that people should maybe have on land or not have? We're looking at crofting, and the question crofting committee and NFU is going to put to you shortly, Donna, and others, is what is the role of crofting in the 21st century? We need to re-establish that. We cannot really continue something which belongs to the 19th century because we're dealing with today's problems today and we need today's solutions for that. The analogy I've got, we're on a journey and we're looking at the car we're going to take on that journey, but we don't know what we're going, how we're going to get there, what baggage we need with us and what baggage we need to discard. And this journey is the thing I want to centre the thinking of the panel around there. There's so much more I could add to this question, but someone talked about aligning planning and land rights responsibility statement. Absolutely correct. But this conversation needs to come. What do we pull together to get this holistic view? What is our destination? So the question to the panel is, what is the destination for Scotland?
I think you may have stolen my last question to the panel as well, because that is absolutely, in a nutshell, what this is about, the destination. But go on, any brief thoughts at the moment? Andrew.
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to what I said my first part, which was that there needs to be an equilibrium in terms of those that want land can have access to it. I mean, we're lying if we think that everyone in Scotland wants land. Just before yesterday, I did the sums, and I think we were all entitled to 3.6 acres, and if we take out under 18s, then we get good 4.7 acres each. But there's a vast amount of the Central Belt who have absolutely no interest. I work for Buccleuch and I work for Glamis Castle. Glamis Castle, I think I've known about it even living in Northumberland. I've known Glamis for years. And I go to the Central Belt and talk to people, and they've got absolutely no idea about it. Don't know where it is, what its relevance is to the history of the nation, or anything. So I think there are people who are interested in rural Scotland, but there are just as many people who are not interested in rural Scotland.
Yeah. And James, this question of the destination is, of course, exactly what we're hoping to open up through ScotLand Futures. Do you want to say a bit about where we hope that may go?
Yes, I think.
No, just use one of the others.
Yes, I think that's exactly it, and it kind of touches on, I think, Hamish, your kind of previous question around consensus. I don't think we'll ever get to a position on consensus, but there is a kind of a world view that could be a settled view that people can agree with or disagree with to a greater or lesser extent, but can be accepted as that's really what's going to happen. That's where the kind of the sense of society is moving. That's the kind of political direction within Parliament. And actually, if that is the kind of the settled worldview in that sense, it's then about establishing the policy around it, the legislation around it. But it is about joining all those different things up together. I mean, at the moment, I think, as everyone is aware, government has targets for tree planting, both for commercial timber and for carbon sequestration, targets around agricultural land, food security, targets around rural housing and development, as well as urban housing. Land is still a finite resource, and all of these things will have to exist and be balanced in one way, shape or form. What we perhaps lack at the moment is that settled worldview of what are Scotland's needs and ambitions today, tomorrow, in 20 years, in 30 years, And if we're looking at the impetus of climate change and biodiversity, what does it look like in a century? What world are we going to be bequeathing to our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren that we'll be responsible for today and tomorrow, but we won't see? And I think some of those bigger long-term questions are really challenging to answer in debate and in discourse at the moment, when there are so many other things going on. But nevertheless, they're the things that need to be reached, and it is about not reaching that consensus, but at least settling on a view we can all live with.
Okay, and I think for what may need to be our last question, Edward, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you very much. I've spent the last 14 months of my life looking at land reform with the Net Zero Committee. And I don't want to rain on any of your parades, but in 10 years as an MSP in the Parliament, and the tens of thousands of letters that I've had on subjects in Scotland, land reform is a very, very small part of them. In the in the entire time of the Scottish Parliament, nearly 26 years, this will be our third land reform bill. And not one of the land reform bills have ever dealt with a problem that faces a much bigger proportion of the population than those that live in the countryside. And that's urban land reform. And this bill does nothing on it. Does the panel have a view whether urban land reform should take precedence over rural land reform, which I disappointingly to say to you has very little appeal to most of the constituents that I represent in the Highlands and Islands?
An excellent challenge for the panel. So more on urban land reform?
I'll
go on, James.
Happy to go get it. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. There needs to be that focus. And I think one of the things that's really interesting that we find through our work is that absolutely when you talk to people about land reform, the vast majority will go, what? But when you talk to people about housing, about access to land for agriculture, opportunities for new entrants, for crofts, for all these types of things, for infrastructure, for broadband, for what might be happening in terms of tree planting or planning or energy infrastructure in their locality, those are the issues of power and control that they recognise, where decisions are made, where the processes are maybe not working quite right or as they would like to see them happen. So it might not be badged land reform. And indeed, of course, these things happen in all other jurisdictions as well. And by and large, they're not called land reform. But they still exist, and they still need to be dealt with by us, by society, by government, and it's finding a way through. So I think absolutely those issues in urban are perhaps a bit neglected at the moment, but they are equally valid and equally need to be addressed in future. But maybe we just don't call it land reform.
Edward, I totally agree with James. And what I tried to connect with in my vision of Scotland is that this issues about energy and food and our water services, they're all really connected with land reform, ownership, management of Scotland's resources. And the connection between urban and rural Scotland, I think, is an interesting one. What I would love urban Scotland to see is that their quality of life is highly dependent on all the things that are happening in rural Scotland. So our water, where is that coming from? How is it managed? Our energy, who is getting the disruption from that infrastructure? I would really love that connection of the vast majority of the population to see what is happening in the rest of the land mass. And if we close that gap, then I think also the kind of excess consumption might be reined in a bit, where people see it's not just an endless water supply, it's not an endless energy supply. There are people who are being affected by that, as well as food is in that mix as well.
Right, now, before we finish, which we must do in a minute, I'll go back, I just want to give each of our panellists a final word and or put you on the spot for a final chance. If you were looking back in decades to come on a successful programme of land reform, what would be the standout outcome to you? Very brief answers, please. Let's just run from this end down. Donna.
The working mic. Okay, so very brief. That we see many more people with affordable access to land, with a model focused on much more small-scale ownership. That we do not have absentee landowners, and the people that own the land live on it, are invested in it, and hold proper stewardship over it. And that most of Scotland would be owned by communities, and that we've got 10,000 new crofts somewhere.
Excellent. Andrew?
Mine comes down to tenant farming. This generation is responsible for maintaining tenant farming. If we let it slip, that's it, gone forever, and we really need to make sure that it survives. It's an opportunity for those who aren't born into land ownership to get into it, and it is so important for the future of rural Scotland.
Great, thank you. Cole?
I think mine would be to do with collective governance and meaningful governance at local levels, so that folks who these ways of being and ways of commoning people are able to relearn how to do that. And but what I mean by that is that they'll have meaningful decisions that they can play into energy, into housing, into all these sorts of things. So something that can strengthen and actually give meaning to meaningful local governance.
Thank you. Jill?
I think my main point of evaluation was the trend of rural depopulation has reversed, because that would mean that people find it really attractive to live in rural Scotland and they want to be there.
Excellent. James?
Well, I want to pick that one now, but no, I think in all fairness, we're not having this debate again in 10 years' time, because we've been having land reform debates for quite a while, and I think we really do need to get to a point where we could reach that settled view, even if it's not 100% consensus. But I think that, for me, is the measure of success, that we've settled on something and we're moving forward.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have our agenda there. We have our outcomes for land reform. What I hope, and first of all, thank you very much to all 5 panellists. Thank you for being willing to grapple with the question of what this looks like long term, what the end point is. What I hope we've done is just stimulate some thinking and open some thoughts. As I said at the start, this is really at the start of a process for us at the Land Commission, where over the course of the summer and the months to come, we want to open up this question and get a really wide range of perspectives on what would it look like to complete the land reform journey, and how can we bring the certainty and clarity that people are looking for across the sector on that. So I hope this may have stimulated some of your own thinking. Particularly about the outcomes. I think it really is helpful to lift our sights from the amendments, from the legislation, from the individual policies, to what are we trying to achieve, the outcomes and the shared sense of what that looks like. We would still like to hear from all of you on that as the summer goes on, as the year goes on. You can contribute directly. Please have a look on our website. You'll find a very simple online survey form. Please let us know your own personal thoughts on what it would look like to complete the land reform journey. If you'd like us to come and talk to you, to your organisations, very happy to come and do that. We're inviting a number of individuals to contribute their thoughts as we go on, and then we'll be publishing these over the summer and as the year goes on to help stimulate a wider discussion on this. And that's before we, as the Land Commission, then towards the end of the year, turn our own thoughts to collating what we've heard from everyone into what do we think this might look like as a future agenda, an outcome for the land reform process. So please do keep in touch with us on that. I hope today's discussion has helped. It's certainly raised a fascinating range of perspectives and things for us to think about. And in the meantime, we would be very happy to hear from any of you. Please just get in touch if you'd like to continue the conversation directly with us. Thank you all. Help yourself to tea and cakes at the back.